boys and girls. Welcome back. Happy Wednesday to you. And we're going to keep going with BFG. So we ended with Sophie saying that the dream, or she asked, what are you going to feed the dream? And he said, well, the dream doesn't need any food. And she said, that's cruel. Everything alive needs some sort of food. And so the BFG says, the north wind is alive. It is moving. It touches you on the cheek and on your hands, but nobody is feeding the wind. Sophie was silent. The extraordinary giant was disturbing her ideas. He seemed to be leading her towards mysteries that were beyond her understanding. A dream is not needing anything, the BFG went on. If it is a good one, it is waiting peacefully forever until it is released and allowed to do its job. If it is a bad one, it is always fighting to get out. The BFG stood up and walked over to one of the many shelves and placed the latest jar among the thousands of others. Please, can I see some of the other dreams? Sophie asked. The BFG hesitated. Nobody has ever seen them before, he said, but perhaps after all I is letting you have a little peep. He picked her up off the table and stood her on the palm of his huge hands. He carried her towards the shelves. Over here were some of the good dreams, the Fizz Wizards. Would you hold me closer so I can read the labels, please? Sophie asked. The labels is only telling little bits of it, the BFG said. The dreams is usually much longer. The labels is just to remind me. Sophie started to read the labels. The first one seemed long enough to her. It went right around the jar. And as she read it, she had to keep turning the jar. This is what it said. Today, I is sitting in class, and I discover that if I is staring very hard at my teacher in a special way, I is able to put her to sleep. So I keep staring at her, and in the end, her head drops to her desk, and she goes fast asleep and snorkles loudly. Then in marches the head teacher, and he shouts, "Wake up, Miss Plumridge! How dare you go to sleep in class? You fetch your hat and coat, and you leave this school forever. You is sacked." But in a jiffy, I is putting the head teacher to sleep as well, and he just crumples slowly to the floor like a lump of jelly, and there he lies all in a heap and starts snorkeling even louder than Miss Plumridge. And then I is hearing my mummy's voice saying, "Wake up! Your breakfast is ready." Okay, so all of that was written by who do you think? Yeah, the BFG. He said snorkels instead of snores. And there was something else. Oh, you is sacked, which means basically you are fired, is what the headmaster was, or the head teacher was saying. What a funny dream, Sophie said. It's a ring beller, the BFG said. It's a whoopsie. Inside the jar, just below the edge of the label, Sophie could see the putting to sleep dream lying peacefully on the bottom, pulsing gently, sea green like the other one, but perhaps a little bit larger. Do you have separate dreams for boys and girls? Sophie asked. This is a picture of that teacher sleeping. Of course, the BFG said. If I is giving a girl's dream to a boy, even if it was a really wopsy girl's dream, the boy would be waking up and thinking, what a rot bungling, grink sludging old dream was that? Boys would, Sophie said. But here is all the girls' dreams on this shelf, the BFG said. Can I read a boy's dream? Sophie asked. You can, the BFG said, and he lifted her up higher to a higher shelf. The label on the nearest boy's dream jar read as follows. I is making myself a marvelous pair of suction boots, and when I put them on, I is able to walk straight up the kitchen wall and across the ceiling. Well, I is walking upside down on the ceiling when my big sister comes in and she starts to yell at me, as she always does. Yelling, "What on earth is you doing up there walking on the ceiling?" And I looks down at her and I smiles and I say, "I told you you was driving me up the wall and now you has done it." I find that one rather silly, Sophie said. Boys wouldn't, the BFG said, grinning. It's another ring beller. Perhaps you have seen enough now. Let me read another boys one, Sophie said. The next label said, the telephone rings in our house, and my father picks it up and says in his very important telephony voice, Simpkins speaking. Then his face goes white and his voice goes all funny and he says, what? Who? And then he says, yes, sir, I understand, but surely it is me you're wishing to speak, not my little son. My father's face is going from white to dark purple, and he is gulping like he has a lobster stuck in his throat. And then at last he is saying, yes, sir, very well, sir, I will get him, sir. And then he turns to me and he says in a rather respectful voice, is you knowing the President of the United States? And I says, no, but I expect he is hearing about me. Then I is having a long talk on the phone and saying things like, let me take care of it, Mr. President. You'll bungle it all up if you do it your way. And my father's eyes is googling right out of his head. And that is when I is hearing my father's real voice saying, get up, you lazy slob, or you will be late for school. Boys are crazy, Sophie said. Let me read this next one. Sophie started reading the next label. I is having a bath, and I is discovering that if I press quite hard on my tummy button, a funny feeling comes over me, and suddenly my legs is not there, nor is my arms. In fact, I has become absolutely invisible all over. I is still there, but no one can see me, not even myself. So my mummy comes in and says, where is that child? He was in the bath a minute ago, and he can't possibly have washed himself properly. So I say, here I is. And she says, where? And I say, here. And she says, where? And I say, here. And she yells, Henry, come up quick. And when my daddy rushes up, I is washing myself, and my daddy sees the soap floating around in the air, but of course he's not seeing me, and he shouts, where are you, boy? And I say, here. And he says, where? And I say, here. And he says, where? And I say, here. And he says, the soap, boy, the soap. It's flying in the air. And then I press my tummy button again, and now I is visible. My daddy is squiffy with excitement, and he says, you is the invisible boy. And I says, now I is going to have some fun. So when I is out of the bath, and I is dried myself, I put on my dressing gown and slippers, and I press my tummy button again to become invisible. And I go down into the town, and I walk the streets. Of course, only me is invisible, but not the thing I is wearing. So when people seeing a dressing gown and slippers floating along the street with nobody in it, there's a panic with everybody yelling, a ghost, a ghost. And people is screaming left and right, and big strong policemen is running for their lives. And best of all, I see Mr. Grummet, my algebra teacher, coming out of a pub, and I float up to him and I say, boo. And he lets out a frightsome howl and dashes back into the pub, and then I is waking up, and I feeling happy as a whiff squiddler. That is pretty ridiculous, Sophie said. All the same, she couldn't resist reaching down and pressing her own tummy button to see if it worked. Nothing happened. Dreams is very mystical things, the BFG said. Human beings is not understanding them all. Not even their brainiest professors is understanding them. Has you seen enough? Just this last one, Sophie said. This one here. She started reading. I has written a book, and it is so exciting nobody can put it down. As soon as you has read the first line, you is so hooked on it you cannot stop reading until the last page. In all the cities, people is walking in the streets, bumping into each other because their faces is buried in my book, and dentists is reading it and trying to fill teeth at the same time, but nobody minds because they is all reading it too in the dentist chair. Drivers is reading it while driving, and cars is crashing all over the country. Brain surgeons is reading it while they is operating on brains, and airline pilots is reading it and going to Timbuktu instead of London. Football players is reading it on the field because they can't put it down. So is the Olympic runners while they is running. Everybody has to see what is going to happen next in my book, and when I wake up, I is still tingling with excitement at the being the greatest writer in the world has ever known until my mummy comes in and says, I was looking at your English exercise book last night, and really, your spelling is atrocious, and so is your punctuation. That's enough for now, the BFG said. There is dillions more, but my arms is getting tired holding you up. What are all those over there? Sophie asked. Why have they got such tiny labels? That, the BFG said, is because one day I is catching so many dreams, I is not have the time or energy to write out long labels. But there is enough to remind me. Can I look? Sophie said. The long-suffering BFG carried her across to the jars she was pointing to. Sophie read them rapidly, one after another. I is climbing Mount Everest with just my cat for company. I is inventing a car that runs on toothpaste. I is able to make the electric lights go on and off just by wishing it. I is only 8-year-old boy, but I is growing a splendid bushy beard and all the other boys is jealous. I is able to jump out of any high window and float down safely. I has a bat, a pet bat. No, I'm sorry. I has a pet bee that makes rock and roll music when it flies. So here are those pictures. See if I can get those in the frame there. Those were all the little dreams. What amazes me, Sophie says, is how you ever learned to write in the first place. Ah, said the BFG. I has been wondering how long it is before you've been asking me that. Well, considering you never went to school, I think it is quite marvelous, Sophie said. How did you learn? All right, and we're going to stop there because I'm right at 12 minutes and I don't want to take up more of your guys' time. So we'll learn how the BFG learned how to write tomorrow. So hope you guys have a great Wednesday, and I will see you tomorrow on Thursday.